RRR, directed by R Rajamouli, is not a pro-Hindutva film because it is not about Hindu domination nor it is fascist. Neither it is about toxic masculinity nor it is casteist. But what RRR is, fictional account of two Indian revolutionaries, Komarao Bheem played by NTR Rama and Aaluri Sitarama Raju played by Ram Charan, who fight British colonial rule which ruled over India for over 200 years. Hi, welcome to Culture Vulture. I am Prateek. In this video, I am going to analyze why RRR is not a Hindutva nationalist propaganda film as many critics claimed it to be. Recently, RRR got the Oscar nomination, won a Golden Globe for the best song and won accolades from the audiences globally. There have been also much criticism of this film, particularly in American media. Their moot point of criticism was that this film is casteist, promotes toxic masculinity, Hindutva fascism and whatnot. But the strange thing is that this film is none of that. But let's counter the criticism of this film one by one in this video. RRR is Hindutva propaganda. One common criticism that this film faced is that it is pro-Hindutva because it shows the image of Ram. Ram, as you know, is the mythological hero from the epic saga Ramayana. And these critics are saying that it is not right to show image of Ram because it is the image used by the Hindu nationalists who have used the image of Ram to trample down minorities, particularly Muslims. It is right, but one has to see how the image of Ram is being used in this particular film. His image is not shown to oppress people but rather to fight against the colonizers who have ruled over us for over 200 years. Using the imagery of mythological hero to fight against an empire which colonized almost all the world, I would call it the clever use of imagery. In fact, I would go so far to say that Rajamouli appropriates the image of Ram, whose image in recent past has been shown as the symbol of Hindu domination, and rehabilitates it into something which fight against tyrannical empire. After all, what good are the figures of mythological characters and heroes if they cannot become the symbol of resistance against the unjust empire? Also, it is quite common to see Christ imagery juxtaposed with Hollywood superheroes. I don't see why the image of Ram could not be used in a similar way. After all, Indian mythological heroes are rarely depicted in popular culture. If nothing, it at least brought back the imagery of Ram in global light with a positive spin on it. Edward Said in his book Orientalism says that the West, Western Europe and United States of America always tries to project East as an opposite to its own image. So, if the America and Western Europe are multicultural, it is important for them to project Asia, particularly India, as a culture which has just one kind of culture and religion, which India becomes if looked at it from a Hindutva perspective, which wants to make India as predominantly Hindu country. But in RRR, nothing like that is shown. RRR shows India's multiplicity, not just in culture but also in religion. If RRR was Hindutva propaganda, it would have just shown Hindus fighting against the Britishers. But in RRR, nothing like that is shown. That is why RRR is not a Hindutva propaganda film. It promotes toxic masculinity. During the British colonial rule, there was a common propaganda that Indian men are not masculine enough, that Indians are emasculated, effeminate people who cannot rule on their own. Denouncing Indian masculinity as feminine was one way British justified its logic of hypermasculinity as its viable replacement. It is the same kind of propaganda that was used to justify colonialism, not just in India, but everywhere the British ruled. The British defamed the masculinity of that particular colony through propaganda to justify its rule. For example, most men of Africa were denounced as heathen-like and were hypersexualized, which justified the colonial conquest in Africa as an attempt to civilize the African. Even today, when you see popular male Indian characters which are popular among the Western audiences, you see them either as very geeky, effeminate, even though they would be very educated, but overall they are shown as some kind of losers who cannot get a date, speak in weird accents and are very geeky. Mostly shown as playing second fiddle to their white counterparts. While most Western, particularly white characters are smart, logical, bordering on geniuses, characters such as Sherlock and other superhero are shown as epitome of Western masculinity. RRR subverts this stereotype of Indian men by representing two men who fight the colonial rule with the mere power of their fist. RRR is casteist. Indian caste system or Jati and Varna system is thousands of years old. It is division of society into various social groups. According to this system, the people at the bottom are Dalits and at the top are Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas. The practice of dividing people into fixed hierarchies has led to the discrimination towards those who are at the bottom. Many American as well as Indian media outlets have criticized RRR for being casteist. Since this practice has been prevalent in India for a long time, calling any Indian cultural product casteist is not unusual. However, expecting every Indian culture product to be riddled with it is also not correct. The critics have said that in RRR, Bhima was shown as inferior to Raju because he is a tribal, a person who is considered an outsider to the caste system. He is shown in many scenes as subservient to Raju. While Raju becomes Ram in one scene, Bhima carries him on his shoulder and thus, according to the critics, becomes his subservient. Critics also say that while Raju can read and write, Bhima can't do that. So they are saying that since Bhima comes from the forest and is tribal and Raju a city boy, Raju is shown to be superior to Bhima. And thus the critics say that this film is casteist. So let me counter this criticism of this film by saying that in the film, even if Bhima cannot read and write, he has indigenous knowledge. He knows how to make medicines, he is brave and have control over nature, which is shown in the scenes in which he fights a tiger and brings in animal to fight Britishers. It is not that Bhima is inferior to Raju, it is just that he has different abilities. If the critics think that being able to make medicine, to forego your mission to save a friend's life, and to be able to have absolute control over nature is casteist and thereby inferior capabilities, then the problem lies not with the film, but with the lenses with which such critics see the film. It is they who are casteist to think that tribal people are in any way inferior to the one who live in the cities, and that indigenous knowledge systems are inferior. And criticizing so vehemently something which has been so much loved by the masses, which includes majority of Dalits, tribals and other minorities, goes on to show the class privilege of such critics and intellectuals. They absolutely detest the taste of the working class and minorities and denounce their taste as anti-intellectual and regressive. If the perspective with which such critics criticize this film is not casteist, then I don't know what is. The problem with Indian critics. Thomas Macaulay, a British educationist, once said, "We must at present do our best to present a class who may be interpreters between us and millions we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in morals and in intellect." Thomas B. Macaulay, Minutes on Education. These critics are actually product of such kind of education which Macaulay mentioned in his speech. Even though such intellectuals are Indian by birth, they think and feel like Westerners. Philosopher Gayatri Spivak calls such intellectuals native informers. They are those who live in previously colonized country but now work for the people who previously colonized them. Are such critics, by criticizing India from a Western perspective, not furthering the colonial logic that East, particularly India, is full of irrational practices, that they are those people who practice the ancient form of discrimination and thus British colonialism was justified in its rule over them? What such critics do is nothing but exemplify in more words the colonial prejudice against the Indian people, that their culture is inferior to the more rational Western culture. Recently, when asked a veteran theatre and film actor what she thinks about RRR, she says that it is looking backwards and that it is regressive. Backwards. Is colonial rule thing of the past and we should all forget about it? Is it not relevant anymore? Has British imperialism not looted us for 200 years and made us into a poor country? Did their divide and rule policy not resulted in partition of India, which costed millions of people their lives and unimaginable suffering? And has the British colonialism not changed hand with American imperialism, who now through market forces, through culture and by force still dominate most of the world? Their gripe with RRR is that it doesn't just try to please the sophisticated audiences like them and does not care about the nuances. It is unabashedly cater to the local taste, they also complain how could this film celebrate Indian masculinity, which they vilify at home. In the West, where the hero in cinema today is mocked and berated, and there is a real lack of genuine hero figures, in that climate, we have a film from India whose heroes are not fighting some alien ghost zombies but are fighting something real, the villains of which oppressed most of the world once upon a time, who now in other guise still rule most of the world. When the West is appreciating a film in which two men fight colonial rule, we have in India critics criticizing the film itself for appealing to the masses. I think this kind of criticism has more to do with the inherent inferiority complex that few elite Indians have about their own culture, about their own self, and about their history. This kind of criticism doesn't help improve the film but rather works to defame it. The sure-shot way to keep such critics happy is to make such films which no one watches in the country but which are appreciated in the West for the wokeness shown in them and which only points out the problems that India faces. What they ultimately want is Indian popular films to be replaced by the junk that Hollywood is making, whose main function today is not just to blind people with vacant spectacle but also to ideologically manipulate them. This does not mean that RRR is not without its problem. In RRR, there is just too much emphasis on the spectacle, which makes it a worthwhile cinematic experience, but then it doesn't leave much to ponder on after one is done watching the film. But then this film is a mass entertainer and does not try to be anything more. And I would rather appreciate it for what it is. Anyway, that's all for today now. Thanks for watching. Do subscribe to support this channel. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.